All right, today we're jumping into the story of a filmmaker who is, well, he's a real puzzle. He's both a celebrated cinematic genius and a deeply, deeply controversial political figure. His name is Emir Kusturica, and you really can't understand his story without understanding the country he came from, Yugoslavia.
So how does one artist become both of these things at the same time? I mean, on one hand, you've got this visionary director, one of only a handful of filmmakers to win the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival, not once, but twice. And on the other hand, you have a figure who's been called a propagandist, even a traitor. To really get it, we need to dig into the man, his movies, and the incredibly turbulent history that shaped them both. So first up, let's talk about the artist. Because before all the controversy, Kusturica just exploded onto the world stage with a cinematic style that was impossible to ignore. His work was, and it still is, just unmistakably his. And this quote really gets to the heart of his early stuff. He had this unique way of blending what's called magical realism, where fantastical things happen in a totally realistic setting, with this gritty Eastern European social drama. The result? Films that feel chaotic, almost anarchic and surreal, but are always, always deeply human. Okay, so the best place to start has to be with his first Palme d'Or winner. Even after this long and frankly wild career, a lot of people still say When Father Was Away on Business is his absolute crowning achievement. And this is where you really see his genius for weaving the personal with the political.
The way the personal and political are intertwined here is just perfect. The whole movie is set during this massive political event when the leader of Yugoslavia, Tito, broke away from Stalin's Soviet Union. But the story follows this young boy, Malek, whose dad gets sent to a labor camp for making a careless comment. And through Malek's eyes, the film brilliantly shows a country moving away from the cult-like worship of its leader, Tito, by focusing on a boy who's moving away from idolizing his own very flawed father. It's just brilliant.
But then, just a few years later, Kusturica completely switches gears. He leaves that world of social realism behind for something way more mythic, way more surreal, with a film called Time of the Gypsies.
Time of the Gypsies is just a wild mix. He throws all these different genres into a blender to tell this classic story about a good kid who gets pulled into a world of crime. It's packed with these unforgettable dream-like images, like a house literally floating in the air, or a wedding veil drifting through a river like a ghost. And because it's filmed entirely in the Romani language, it feels less like a movie and more like you're watching some ancient, powerful myth come to life.
But you just can't talk about Kusturica's career without talking about the violent history that was exploding all around him and his home. And this is where the story gets a whole lot darker and a whole lot more complicated.
To really get a grip on the controversy, you have to understand this moment in time. The breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s was just a seismic event. After its longtime leader Tito died, all these nationalist tensions that had been bottled up for decades just erupted into a series of incredibly brutal wars. This decade of conflict became the tragic, unavoidable backdrop for the most controversial part of Kusturica's career.
So as the country itself is literally breaking apart, its whole cultural identity just shatters with it. What used to be one single, really diverse Yugoslav cinema was now being chopped up into separate national traditions. Artists were being forced to pick a side in a conflict that was pitting neighbor against neighbor. And the choices Kusturica made put him right in the middle of a very bitter debate.
For a lot of people, especially back in his hometown of Sarajevo, which was this incredible melting pot of cultures, his choices felt like a massive betrayal. See, he was born into a secular Muslim family, in a city that was a beacon of diversity. So his apparent unwillingness to criticize Serbian nationalism, and later his friendships with some really controversial politicians, well, for many of his former friends and colleagues, it started to tarnish the genius of his art.
And look, this wasn't just about Kusturica. The wars in the 90s turned cinema itself into a kind of cultural and political battlefield. It became a fight to control the story, the narrative of what was happening and why.
It's a really twisted irony, right? That it took this absolutely horrific conflict for the world to suddenly pay so much attention to the region's filmmakers. Over 250 films, feature films and documentaries were made about the breakup, as filmmakers from inside and outside the war zone scrambled to try and make sense of the chaos.
But here's the thing, some of these movies weren't just telling stories. No, they were actively trying to shape reality. They became tools to manufacture consent for violence, to kind of soothe the society into accepting war crimes by showing them a version of events that was completely skewed.
And this led to something one writer called a grateful audience. And what he meant by that is, well, it's pretty chilling. He described being at a movie premiere in Belgrade, where a scene showing the massacre of Muslims was met with wild cheering and applause from the audience. It's a powerful and pretty terrifying example of how cinema became a tool of ideology, training an audience to react in a very specific and horrifying way.
Okay, so all of this, it leads us right to Kusturica's most famous, most complicated, and yeah, by far his most controversial film. The one that got him that second Palme d'Or and really cemented his divided legacy, Underground.
So Underground is this massive, sprawling, 3-hour epic. In the story it tells, get this, it follows Yugoslavia from World War II all the way to the wars in the 90s through the eyes of two friends. One of them gets tricked into hiding in a cellar for decades, manufacturing weapons, completely convinced that World War II is still going on above ground.
The second this film came out, it just split everyone down the middle. I mean, people either thought it was a visionary masterpiece, or they saw it as thinly veiled Serbian nationalist propaganda. The debate was fierce, and honestly, it's still raging today. There is just no middle ground when it comes to Underground. So, what is it? I mean, seriously, is it a history lesson? No way. It's way too weird and surreal for that. Is it a satire on propaganda? Well, at times it feels a little too sincere. Is it actual propaganda itself? It's probably too messy and self-critical for that. Every single time you think you've figured it out, it just slips through your fingers and becomes something else.
And you know what? Maybe that's the whole point. The film is chaotic, it's sprawling, some people have even called it ugly. But maybe its real power is in that ugliness, in its complete refusal to give you any easy answers to the incredibly complex, painful story of Yugoslavia's rise and fall.
So in the end, we're left with this puzzle, right? The enigma of Emir Kusturica really mirrors the complexity of that whole era, where art and history and politics were just all tangled up together. Was he a genius whose art was misunderstood? Or was he a willing player in a nationalist project? His films don't give you a simple answer. They leave it up to us to decide what we see in his powerful, chaotic, and deeply controversial work.